I don't want any more scraps. I don't need any more scraps. I don't want any more. Oh, look, scraps. Yay! In this quilt-along, we've been exploring different ways of using up our scraps so that we're not just making the same scrappy block, or maybe the same crumb blocks, or perhaps even the same string blocks. In part 1 of this 4-part series, we have been exploring how to use our scraps, strings, strips, and crumbs to give traditional quilt blocks a little bit of a different look. And in this video, we will conclude part 1 of this series by making the Sawtooth star. To make this crumb version of the Sawtooth star, here is what I used. I have 8 4.5-inch crumb squares. I used 4 of those squares to make 2 at a time half-square triangles, 2 which I turned into flying geese units. I used the other 4 as the corners of the block. I also used this dark red print that I pulled from our larger scrap stash. Now from that dark red print, I cut 5 4.5-inch squares, 4 of which became the other half of the flying geese units, and I used the last square and whatever was left over to build the center of the block. I started constructing the block with cutting the 4 corners. I took 4 of the crumb squares and trimmed them down to 3.5 inches. I kept all of the trimmings because, well, I planned to use them when constructing the center of the block. Next, I constructed the half-square triangle units, which I turned into flying geese units. I did the 2 at a time half-square triangle method. I drew a diagonal line on the back of the dark red fabric, sewed a 1/4 inch away on both sides of that diagonal line, then cut the square in half on the drawn diagonal line, giving me 2 half-square triangle blocks. I trimmed the blocks to measure 3.5 inches and, well, I pressed my seam allowances toward the dark red fabric. Then I put the 2 half-square triangle units right sides together, making sure that the dark red fabric is in the upper left and upper right corners, or they become the wings of the flying geese unit. Now, because of the bulk with all the crumbs, I pressed the seam allowances on this particular unit open, but you can press it to one side if you prefer. Now, in between all that sewing and pressing when making the flying geese units, I was also constructing the center block at the same time by sewing parts of it as a leader and ender, or chain stitching it in. I took all the trimmings and sewed it to the last 4.5-inch dark red square and kept adding to it until I had a square that measured 6.5 inches. Finally, I laid out the block, sewed the squares into rows, and then sewed the rows together. I am really happy with how this block came out, so let's have a look. So here is my crumb version of the block, and because I originally cut a 4.5-inch square here for the center, well, 4.5 inches wasn't quite big enough to make it for the center block, so I just started sewing crumbs around it and then decided to actually put a frame of the same fabric, and well, I'm happy with this. Now, you can do whatever you want to in that center block, so just experiment with different things or different fabrics, or even if you got spare crumb pieces, scraps, hey, experiment with it, see what you come out with. Before we start constructing our string version of the Sawtooth star, I thought we should take a moment and talk a little bit about fabric selection. You see, what we're looking at here is Well, this was the original block that I constructed, but I wasn't 100% satisfied with it simply because of the fact that I kind of felt that the star legs didn't pop, or they were kind of blended in with the rest of the strings. What I didn't notice originally was the fact that, well, in my string squares, I had already a lot of green fabric. And I was using green fabric to create the star legs, and so the star legs, to me, just got, or they kind of just blended in with the rest of the blocks. So when you're choosing fabrics to construct your flying geese units or for your star legs, make sure you're taking a look at all the different fabrics that you have in your crumb blocks or your string blocks or whatever it is you're using, because if the fabric colors are a little too close, well, your star legs may or may just blend in with the rest of the fabrics, and you won't be able to see the actual star. So I redid this block, making sure that I chose my fabrics a little bit more wisely, and along the way I also made some revisions. To make this revised string version, I'm using 4 6.5-inch string squares, which I will cut into 3.5 by 6.5-inch rectangles. Now with all your scrap pieces that you just cut off, well, don't get rid of these because we're going to actually be using these to make the center of our Sawtooth star block. So just put these aside for a second so that you don't get them mixed up with the actual 3.5 by 6.5-inch rectangles that you just cut. I also found this blue fabric in my larger scrap stash, from which I will cut 8 3.5-inch squares. These string rectangles and blue squares will be used to create the star legs or flying geese units. I wasn't sure what I was going to use for the corners of the block, but I settled on this darker pink fabric which I found in my larger scrap stash, and I cut 4 3.5-inch squares from that fabric. First, I wanted to construct the flying geese units or the star legs of the blocks. I was using the one-at-a-time flying geese method, or some quilters call this the snowball method because, well, you're basically snowballing the upper two corners of the 3.5 by 6.5-inch rectangle with your 3.5-inch squares. I drew a diagonal line from corner to corner on the back of 4 of the 3.5-inch blue squares. Then paired it right sides together with the 3.5 by 6.5-inch string rectangle, sewing on the diagonal line. Trim a 1/4 inch away from the seam, and press the seam allowance over toward the blue fabric. Then repeat on the opposite end of the rectangle with another 3.5-inch blue square. Make sure you angle the diagonal lines in the correct orientation from the bottom corners of the rectangle to the center top. For the center 6.5-inch square, I used all the trimmed off pieces. And just as in the crumb version, I did this as a leader and ender in between all the sewing and pressing I was doing while making the flying geese units. Finally, I laid out the block, sewed the units into rows, and sewed the rows together. So I didn't like my original design block, and I'm glad that I redid the block. Let's have a look. So this was my original plan, and when I got the block done, I wasn't quite happy with it because, well, for one thing, to me, the star legs just kind of blended in with the rest of the fabrics because there was so much green in there. So I decided to redo it and change it up. So here is my redone version, and I am a lot happier with this because of the fact that the star legs here, well, at least to me, they stand out a little bit more, and you can actually kind of see the star, whereas in the original version, the star was just kind of getting a little bit more lost in the block. I did change the cornerstones to a different fabric color, so don't be afraid to swap it up and change it up when you start to see the block come together. I'm giving you permission to actually make changes and edit as you go. In the end, if you're not happy with the block, well, change something or try and identify what it is that you're not happy with. Again, it's okay to make changes midway through the construction of your block or as soon as you can identify that you don't like something. So swap it up. See what you create. I made a promise at the beginning of this series to actually do a monthly giveaway, and I kind of sort of forgot to do that for the month of March. So I'm going to make up for that in the month of April. So this month, or this time around, we're actually going to do 2 giveaways. So in the first giveaway, I'm going to give away these 3 spools of thread. Now this is Masterpiece thread by Superior Threads, and each of these spools is 2,500 yards of 50 weight Egyptian cotton. Okay. And I've heard some good stuff about this particular thread, so I might be switching from Aurifil, which is what I'm using right now, to this Masterpiece thread. That's giveaway number 1. For giveaway number 2, I'm going to give this book called Crumb Quilts, Scrap Quilting the Zero Waste Way by Emily Bailey. Now, in this book, there are 15 different quilt projects and sewing related projects that you can do using crumb blocks or your scraps. And she doesn't just do scrap blocks. She's actually showing you how you can use these scraps in different ways, kind of like what we're doing in this quilt along series. So for example, here's the Sawtooth star that she made out of a crumb block. There's also patterns in which you're doing applique work. It's not just all about quilts, but she does have a pattern in here in which you make a pin cushion. I do find it's a great book to have if you have a lot of scraps or if you need ideas on how to use your scraps and your crumb blocks. This is a great book to have. So that's the giveaway for number 2. So again, giveaway number 1 is the Superior Threads Masterpiece 3 spools, which are again 2,500 yards each of 50 weight 3-ply Egyptian cotton. And the second giveaway is this book called Crumb Quilts, Scrap Quilting the Zero Waste Way by Emily Bailey. Now, to enter into these giveaways, here's what you gotta do. First, you have to be a member of the Treasure Heart Creations Facebook group. If you're not a member, link is in the description box below. Let's get you signed up. Second, post a picture of your blocks using the hashtag THCS3C. All posts must be done by April 21st, 2023. Then on April 23rd, we will announce the winner. So good luck, and let's all get out there and let's start creating our own blocks. Now there's a video series that I've been working on for the past couple of months, and it's taking me a while to develop these videos because, well, I'm putting a lot more thought into each of these videos. It's not like these are quilting tutorials or where I just show you how to make a block and you can make the quilt on your own. No. Instead, these videos are actually telling the stories behind some of the quilts that I've made. Now, as most of you have probably experienced, if you make a quilt for someone, you usually have that person in mind, or you're making it for a specific purpose. And sometimes the person that you're making it for, or the reason why you're making it, there's a story behind that quilt. And I wanted to actually kind of tap into some of that. I'm calling this video series With Every Stitch. And the idea behind this video series is it's more telling the story of why I even created the quilt in the first place. And so the first video in this series is actually going to talk about how I started my quilting journey and the reasons for why I even started quilting in the first place. But I wasn't quite sure if there was even interest in something like this. So I was kind of toying around. Do I really want to take the time and effort to make a video series like this, or am I just really wasting my time with it? So I wanted to actually give you guys a little bit of a preview as to what I'm thinking about doing. And in the comments below, let me know if you would want to actually see videos that are videos like this in the future, or if this is even a great idea. Who knows, maybe I'll have you as a special guest on one of these videos, sharing a story behind the quilt that you made. Check this video out. Let me know what you think. Anytime it's a first, it's usually the most memorable. Whether it's the firstborn, the first car, the first kiss. I think for quilters, the first quilt that they ever made is the one that they remember the most. I remember every detail about that first quilt that I ever made. From what fabrics I used, to the pattern, to the things that I struggled with. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that remembers all of those details about their first quilt. Well, if you want to see the full video, let me know in the comments down below to say, hey, this is a great idea. I'd love to see the full story. Or if you think it's a bad idea, well, you can also put that in the comments down below. And here are my Sawtooth star blocks. Now, both of these blocks measure about 12.5 inches, give or take your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, for your quilt, you do not have to make two versions of this block. Again, the choice is yours, whether you just want to do one version or you want to do both versions. Maybe you want to do multiple versions. Again, that choice is yours to make. I only made the two versions just for demonstration purposes, but if you want to just do, or if you only want to use crumbs, or if you only want to use strings, again, that choice is yours. So this will conclude part 1 of our scraps, strings, strips, and crumbs quilt along. Now, I kind of thought maybe you don't want to do a Sawtooth star, or maybe you don't want to do a churn dash block. So here's a couple of examples of other blocks that you can do. Again, the idea is to just take a traditional block and make it out of crumbs or strings. So let's have a look at some of these examples. Well, I hope you enjoyed making traditional blocks using crumbs or strings, and I hope you're enjoying this series. Now, don't forget, we do have 2 giveaways going on this month, and the deadline to post your pictures to the Treasure Heart Creations Facebook group is April 21st, 2023. So good luck, and let's all go out there and let's create your blocks.